This is the Art of Darkness podcast with Kevin Kautzman.
And Brad Kelly. We're a couple of very online writers interested in the dark side of what drives creative people to create against all odds.
This show is about art and the people who make it, what it costs them, and what it takes to bring something unique and impactful into the world.
Each episode, we excavate the life and work of an artist you might think you know.
Don't worry, they're all safely dead.
On every episode, we try and find out just what the hell was wrong with them and how they worked through their darkness to create something that lives on after them and continues to move culture.
Find us online at artofdarkpod.com and on Twitter at artofdarkpod. All right, so Left Hand of Darkness. She described the novel as a thought experiment, asking what would human society be like without fixed genders? What would it be like without fixed gender? What would a society be like without fixed genders?
Well, I guess we'll never know.
I guess we'll never know. Through the protagonist, Genli I love that name too, Genli I, a human envoy set to Gethin, Le Guin challenges readers to confront their own assumptions about gender and society. The Left Hand of Darkness won the Hugo and the Nebula, making Le Guin the first woman to win both honors. Awesome. Fortunately, though extrapolation is an element in science fiction, it isn't the name of the game by any means. It is far too rationalist and simplistic to satisfy the imaginative mind, whether the writers or the readers. Variables are the spice of life. If you like, and this is her, if you like, you can read a lot of science fiction as a thought experiment. Let's say that a young doctor creates a human being in his laboratory, like Mary Shelley. Let's say, like Philip K. Dick, that the Allies lost the Second World War. Let's say this or that is such and so, and see what happens. In a story so conceived, the moral complexity proper to the modern novel need not be sacrificed, nor is there any built-in dead end. Thought and intuition can move freely within bounds set only by the terms of the experiment, which may be very large indeed. And that is from her introduction to the 1976 edition of The Left Hand of Darkness, saying, just because you eschew realism by doing a thought experiment at the beginning of your writing does not mean you can't give it the depth of consideration of other, normal literary fiction. All right.
Right.
All right. Yeah. Despite its success, the novel was not without its critics, particularly within the feminist community. Some argued that Le Guin's use of male pronouns to describe the Gethenians undermined the novel's exploration of gender fluidity. Le Guin acknowledged these critiques in later years, revisiting the themes of gender and sexuality in other short stories called Coming of Age in Carhide and The Matter of Segre, and these are from the 90s. And this, I have more about her, about this business of gender from Conversations on Writing. All right. This is very interesting. Talking about grammar and grammar bullies, people telling you, oh, you can't put a preposition at the end of a sentence. Yeah. The grammar bullies, you read them in places like the New York Times, and they tell you what is. I'm done. Yeah. I'm fucking done.
I'm with you.
Listen, I'm so out of patience for all this shit. Okay. All right. You read them in places like the New York Times, and they tell you what is correct. You must never use hopefully. Hopefully, we will be going there on Tuesday. That is incorrect and wrong, and you are basically an ignorant pig if you say it. This is judgmentalism. The game that is being played there is a game of social class. It has nothing to do with the morality of writing and speaking and thinking clearly, which Orwell, for instance, talked about so well. It's just affirming that I am from a higher class than you are. The trouble is that people who aren't taught grammar very well in school fall for these statements from these pundits delivered with vast authority from above. I'm fighting that. Very interesting case in point is using they as a singular. This offends the grammar bullies endlessly. It is wrong, wrong, wrong. Well, it was right until the 18th century when they invented the rule that he includes she. It didn't exist in English before then. Shakespeare used they instead of he or she. We all do. We always have done in speaking in colloquial English. It took the women's movement to bring it back to English literature, and it is important because it's a crossroads between correctness bullying and the moral use of language. If he includes she, but she doesn't include he, a big statement is being made with huge social and moral implications. But we don't have to use he that way. We've got they. Why not use it? This difference between grammatical correctness, this is the interviewer, and the ways language engages moral questions reminds me of this quote of yours. We can't restructure society without restructuring the English language. That the battle is essentially as much at the sentence level as it is in the world. Ursula, as a freshman in college, I read George Orwell's great essay about how writing English is clearly a political matter. It went really deep into me. Often I'm simply rephrasing Orwell. Interviewer, it's reflected in your work as well. I think of The Dispossessed, which we're going to come to, your novel about an anarchist utopia. There is no property in this imagined world, and there are also no possessive pronouns. You wouldn't say my friend. You would say friend Brad. Podcast husband Brad. I know how much you love that, Brad. I know how much you love that. Listen, we're in, you have nothing to worry about.
Or are we in Kemmer right now?
I was just going to say, no. It's
no.
Listen, in the Art of Darkness universe, nobody has sexual organs.
Right.
It's always Asexual Pride Month on
yeah.
Art of Darkness. Somebody popped into our Discord recently and said, I'm here for the sex and violence.
Right on.
I was like, oh, you're one of us. You're gonna fit right in. And let me just pause and say, loving the Discord. Thank you all for joining. It's a lot of fun over there. We've got some great channels on the Discord. I'm gonna take a little break here and give a little bit of commercial. I mean, we're 2.5 hours into the episode, so I hope you all don't mind.
Go for it.
I love Brad, you haven't gotten into the Discord yet. Eventually,
I'm scared of Discord.
There. You're going to be fine. But one day we'll get you in there. But here are the channels in the Art of Darkness Discord if you want to join us at discord.com/artofdarkpod. Pod chat, recommendations, creativity, bookends, the book club, show prep, now listening, memes, film, tunnels. Tunnels is the channel where I put all the conspiracy theories.
All right.
We're talking a lot about P. Diddy in Tunnels.
Oh yeah.
Sports. All about the Huey Lewis in the News album.
It's
really
obsessively focused on it.
Yeah. It's really when they came into their own. The clean new commercial style that really gives the songs a big boost. We have corrections, which is really important. We've been getting some notes from people, particularly I think on YouTube around some of the episodes, and we're always down to hear from you. If we make a mistake or we get something wrong, we love getting corrections.
Sure.
I've got a channel for crypto because why not? Gaming, Art of Darkness Live, AOD Live. So when Detroit comes on, when the day October 26th, that channel will become active. We've got a whole channel for pens, a channel for lifting, eventing, wins, cuisine, theater, and I was nearly going to call this last channel Norm, but I ended up calling the last channel Jokes.
Okay.
Because we got to have a place for jokes. So that's the Art of Darkness Discord. It's totally free. Just get in there. It's fun. You got a bunch of, better imagine the kind of people who listen to this podcast, right? If you want to hang out with a group of people who share common interests, get in there. It gets a little spicy sometimes, but we're all adults. All right. So, let's see here. Getting back to the business of conversations on writing. Let's see. This is the interviewer. I would definitely encourage writers to look at your book reviews to see your thoughts on craft and context in direct engagement with a specific piece of art. For instance, in your review of David Mitchell's The Bone Clocks for The Guardian, you discussed this issue of present tense. It's a great review. You compare Virginia Woolf's stream of consciousness to what you call Mitchell's stream of self-consciousness, and you also bring up some of these issues around time. Here is what you said. I like an interviewer who is like, here's something you said.
Right.
Here in a novel, and this is in a review that she wrote. Here in a novel deeply concerned with time, there is virtually no past tense. Present tense narration is now taken for granted by many fiction readers because everything they read, from internet news to texting, is in the present tense. But at this great length, it can be hard going. Past tense narration easily implies previous times and extends into the misty reaches of the subjunctive, the conditional, the future. But the presence of a continuous eyewitness account admits little relativity of times, little connection between events. The present tense is a narrow beam flashlight in the dark, limiting the view to the next step. Now, now, now. No past, no future. The world of the infant, of the animal, perhaps of the immortal. So this is a woman who thought deeply about writing, and
Mm-hmm.
it's you better know how you're writing your novel. I mean, is
Yeah.
this first person? Mhm.
She's totally right about the present tense. I think the sort of the extension of that is there may be fiction writing context in which you want a narrow flashlight in the darkness, in which that's the effect you're going for, right? But it shouldn't be, yeah, it should be used deliberately to create that effect, I suppose.
Yes. Reflecting on The Left Hand of Darkness, Le Guin remarked, "It forced me to re-examine how deeply gender shapes our thinking, and it was an invitation for readers to do the same." All right. So moving forward, we get to her next masterpiece, The Dispossessed, an Ambiguous Utopia. Brad, have you read this one?
I have, yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
great. Yeah, and you're going to read it again here in just about
yeah.
30 seconds if you can pull up that old
I've got it
PDF. All
here.
right. Yeah, in 1974, so prolific, crazy prolific.
Yeah.
Le Guin published The Dispossessed, a novel subtitled An Ambiguous Utopia. The novel contrasts two planets, Anares, an anarchist society with no government or private property based. I don't know about the no private property, but no government. Great. And
Yeah.
Uras, a capitalist world marked by political corruption and economic inequality. The protagonist, Shevek, is a physicist from Anares who seeks to bridge the gap between the two worlds by sharing his scientific discoveries. Brad, can you read the top of
Mhm.
this one?
Yeah. Quote, there was a wall. It did not look important. It was built of uncut rocks roughly mortared. An adult could look right over it, and even a child could climb it. Where it crossed the roadway, instead of having a gate, it degenerated into mere geometry, a line, an idea of boundary. But the idea was real. It was important. For 7 generations, there had been nothing in the world more important than that wall. Like all walls, it was ambiguous, two-faced. What was inside it and what was outside it depended upon which side of it you were on. Looked at from one side, the wall enclosed a barren 60-acre field called the Port of Anares. On the field, there was a couple of large gantry cranes, a rocket pad, 3 warehouses, a truck garage, and a dormitory. The dormitory looked durable, grimy, and mournful. It had no gardens, no children. Plainly, nobody lived there or was even meant to stay there long. It was, in fact, a quarantine. The wall shut in not only the landing field, but also the ships that came down out of space, and the men that came on the ships, and the worlds they came from, and the rest of the universe. It enclosed the universe, leaving Inaris outside, free. Looked at from the other side, the wall enclosed Inaris. The whole planet was inside it, a great prison camp, cut off from other worlds and other men, in quarantine. A number of people were coming along the road towards the landing field, or standing around where the road cut through the wall. People often came from the of nearby city of Abinay in hopes of seeing a spaceship or simply to see the wall. After all, it was the only after all, it was the only boundary wall on their world. Nowhere else could they see a sign that said no trespassing. Adolescents, particularly, were drawn to it. They came up to the wall. They sat on it. There might be a gang to watch, offloading crates from track trucks at the warehouses. There might even be a freighter on the pad. Freighters came down only 8 times a year, unannounced except to syndics actually working at the port. So when the spectators were lucky enough to see one, they were excited at first. But there they sat, and there it sat, a squat black tower and a mess of movable cranes, away off across the field. And then a woman came over from one of the warehouse crews and said, we're shutting down for today, brothers. She was wearing the defense armband, a sight almost as rare as a spaceship. That was a bit of a thrill. But though her tone was mild, it was final. She was the foreman of this gang, and if provoked, would be backed up by her syndics. And anyhow, there wasn't anything to see. The aliens, the off-worlders, stayed hiding in their ship. No show. Yeah, I think I'll stop it there.
Very good.
Yeah,
Very cool.
yeah.
Amazing. All right. So what do you what's your impression of that?
Of that bit, I mean, a lot of it is it's it's kind of more how to say this. I'm trying to disentangle what I remember of the book from what I just read. So there part of it, I think she's trying to create is boring the world word a sort of a somewhat colorless environment. It's very industrial. There's gantry cranes and a rocket pad, a dormitory, and then there's this wall. Um, and there's something about it that's very rust belty, like sort of featureless, colorless. But she's making a lot of this wall. And so something about this wall is not only a physical wall, but there's clearly like a wall in the minds of the people who live in this place from one side to the other. And this ambiguous nature of what you think the wall is keeping out or keeping in depends on which side of the wall that you're on. So yeah, it's cool. It's interesting. I remember reading this. I read this book when I was probably like 19 or something. And I remember thinking, if I remember right, she does have this like pitting these two very different sociopolitical environments. And the one that was like the anarchist communist slash communist one sounded terrible to me at the time. Just because it was like, if I remember right, you just got like assigned what your job was. Like nobody was really making any decisions about anything. I don't know. It was not, I didn't want to live in that world, was my takeaway.
Right. All
Yeah.
right. Cool. Well, thank you
Um,
for doing all of this reading, Brad. That's super
sure.
helpful.
Yeah, no, it keeps
Helpful.
me in the game here. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah, The Dispossessed is a deeply political novel that explores the complexities of freedom, justice, and the limitations of utopian ideals. She portrays anarchism, its strength and flaws. And she said, I wanted to write about freedom, but I also wanted to acknowledge that freedom is never absolute. I have a link here to something called The Marginalian, and this is a little bit about on time, the measure of loyalty and what responsibility really means. Let's read a little bit of this. Progress is never permanent, will always be threatened, must be redoubled, restated, and reimagined if it is to survive, Zadie Smith wrote in her superb antidote to our ahistorical worldview. So much of our suffering, both personal and political, stems from our inability or rather unwillingness to take a telescopic perspective of time. And this is an article by a woman named Maria Popova. To look past the immediacy of symptoms and instead trace the long arc between cause and effect. Only along such an arc can we propel our moral development, again, both personal and political, toward its highest potentiality, justice, dignity, existential fulfillment. That is what Ursula K. Le Guin explores throughout her 1974 science fiction novel, The Dispossessed in an Ambiguous Utopia, an extension of her classic short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, published a year earlier. I love her like made up words,
Mhm.
which remains one of the most powerful and pause giving thought experiments in literature. Speaking through her protagonist, the mathematician Shevek, her physicist, modeled on the Nobel Prize winning physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, maybe you've heard
Hey.
of him, a friend of her parents, Le Guin writes, our sense of time involves our ability to separate cause and effect, means and end. The baby, again, the animal, they don't see the difference between what they do now and what will happen because of it. They can't make a pulley or a promise. We can. Seeing the difference between now and not now, we can make the connection. Uh, and there, morality enters, responsibility. To say that a good end will follow from a bad means is just like saying that if I pull a rope on this pulley, I will lift the weight on that one. To break a promise is to deny the reality of the past. Therefore, it is to deny the hope of a real future. If time and reason are functions of each other, if we are creatures of time, then we had better know it and try to make the best of it, to act responsibly. Le Guin's protagonist revisits the subject of time in a passage that stands as the prose counterpoint to her splendid Hymn to Time. And Hymn to Time is, what is this? Oh, it's a poem. Let me read this poem. Time says, let there be. Every moment and instantly there is space and the radiance of each bright galaxy, and eyes beholding radiance, and the gnats flickering dance, and the sea's expanse, and death and chance. Time makes room for going and coming home, and in time's womb begins all ending. Time is being, and being time. It is all one thing, the shining, the seeing, the dark abounding. It's a woman influenced by the Tao. And then this is from the
Yeah.
protagonist in The Dispossessed. Fulfillment is a function of time. The search for pleasure is circular or repetitive, atemporal. The variety seeking of the spectator, the thrill hunter, the sexually promiscuous always ends in the same place. It has an end. It comes to the end and has to start over. It is not a journey and return, but a closed cycle, a locked room, a cell. Outside the locked room is the landscape of time in which the spirit may, with luck and courage, construct the fragile, makeshift, improbable roads and cities of fidelity, a landscape inhabitable by human beings. It is not until an act occurs within the landscape of the past and the future that it is a human act. Loyalty, which asserts the continuity of past and future, binding time into a whole, is the root of human strength. There is no good to be done without it. Cool.
All right.
There's
All
more
right.
in this article, but I like that. The idea that loyalty is a value that is only possible over time. Very
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, like The Left Hand of Darkness, the Dispossessed won both the Hugo and Nebula Awards, cementing
Dang.
her status. Not a one-time, one-hit wonder. So she's, bam. The novel's themes of political and social organization, along with its critique of both anarchism and capitalism, have made it a cornerstone of dystopian literature. I've got a little bit here from the last interview. If I've got my pages right, let's see here. And I like this as we're going to go for a few pages here. This interview took place in December 1976 in the house on Arch Street in North Berkeley, where Ursula Le Guin's parents lived when she was born and where she herself grew up. Ms. Le Guin met me at the door and led me through the living room and through the kitchen, where her mother looked up from some culinary project to greet us. Ms. Le Guin and I went into a small sunlit room off the back garden, which had been her father's study. It is now her room when she comes to Berkeley to visit. Through the windows, one can look out at the garden and hear the sound of a small fountain. It is a room that suggests concentration, relaxation, and practical comfort. It is decorated in blacks and browns and contains a bunk bed, several comfortable chairs, and a large table. Ursula K. Le Guin is a tall, slender woman with a neat cap of straight dark hair and large dark eyes. She speaks in a deep, low, musical voice with many inflections. It is a voice that conveys humor or delight in small ironies particularly well. As we talked, she smoked a briar pipe.
Nice.
Yeah. And this is Dorothy Gilbert. You grew up in this house. Does it have strong associations for you of your development as a writer, of when you first developed a sense of yourself as a writer? Le Guin, well, sure. It's a pretty strong-minded house. Yes, I can see that. And a very livable house. Of course, I lived here until I was 17 and didn't move around, so my whole beginnings are here and in the Napa Valley. Gilbert, oh, yes. There was the family home called Kishimish in the Napa Valley. The name came from a mythical figure that your brother made up, I gather. Le Guin, yes, sort of a legend. So her brother makes up this legend, and then they call their house Kishimish. Gilbert, was there much of that kind of legend making, of make-believe among you and your brothers in your childhood? Le Guin, well, yes, all my brothers were nutty in different ways. We were all nutty. That brother is the only one who made up myths. Gilbert, you didn't do that? Well, not in public. He told his aloud. Gilbert, I see. Have you always assumed that you would be a writer? Yes. You didn't decide one day that's what I'm going to do? No, I just knew it. What led you to science fiction? Trying to get published. The stuff I wrote has always been, it's had what you'd have to call a fantasy element. It always did? Always, right from the start, except for the poetry. It took place in an imaginary country or something like that, and the publishers didn't know what to call it. They didn't know what it was, and they didn't publish it. And I got back to reading science fiction in my late 20s, and I thought, hey, maybe I could call my stuff science fiction. So I sent a story to Sel Lali at Fantastic Magazine, and she bought it. And from then on, I was a science fiction writer. They found a label for me. I had a pigeonhole. You have to have a pigeonhole. You have to start with a pigeonhole. Gilbert, and you can't be half in each of the two pigeonholes either. Le Guin, well, You can once you get started. Yes, I'm a juvenile writer, a science fiction writer, and now the Dispossessed and the Orsinian Tales and so on are not labeled science fiction. Now I'm a writer. But you have to get started apparently in a box with the label. Then you can break out of the box. Gilbert, I know from speaking to other science fiction writers like Joanna Roos or Russ that sometimes you have frustrations if you're starting out in your career and you try two things at once, or if you do something that doesn't quite fit in one category or another, then you didn't call yourself science fiction. You're science fiction yourself. So the frustration of being kind of ghettoized in the genre. Le Guin, no, it really is a publisher's label and a bookseller's label, and it's a useful label. I don't resent it. I like to go to the bookstore and find the science fiction all together. And yet, in a way, I don't use the labels much for my own stuff, partly because everybody uses it differently. It's a convenience label, but it doesn't really mean anything. And of course, nobody's ever been able to define it. What is the difference between science fiction and fantasy? Oh, yes, of course. There's the convenient label speculative fiction, spec-fi. Le Guin, spec-fi, yes, laughing. It beats sci-fi. I don't mind SF, but sci-fi for some reason grates. She really doesn't like the phrase sci-fi.
Yeah.
So, okay.
All right. Well, can't blame her. Nobody really likes being labeled all that much, you know.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, and she's got a big brain. You know what
Right.
I mean? So, yeah, big brain. All right. So we're moving. I mean, she's already established herself. We're definitely past the midpoint here. I mean, she's had three children. She's winning all of these awards and prizes. And yet she still wants to be taken seriously. She still wants the
Of
National Book
course.
Award. She still wants, I think in her life, she probably hung on to wanting the Nobel. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Sure. Of course you did. Yeah.
Do you know, like,
Yeah.
why wouldn't you? Uh,
Yeah.
and you know, I just did the Google search. Did Le Guin win the Nobel? Here's their AI results. Okay.
Hmm.
She did not win the Nobel Prize. And this is what it says, though. Here's what she won: 8 Hugos, 6 Nebulas, 25 Locus Awards, Grandmaster of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America, Living Legend from the U.S. Library of Congress, National Book Foundation Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters. And those are only some
Yeah.
of her awards. So,
Not
uh,
good enough.
nope. Um, yeah, I mean, it's just like she's like was like the grand dame of
Mhm.
I'm gonna read the whole read the whole award section here. Um The accolades Le Guin received, this is Wikipedia, include numerous annual awards for individual work. She won 8 Hugo Awards from 26 nominations, 6 Nebula Awards from 18 nominations, including 4 Nebula Awards for Best Novel from 6 nominations, more than any other writer. Locus Magazine subscribers have voted Le Guin to receive 25 Locus Awards. At the time of her death, she was third for total wins, as well as second behind Neil Gaiman, who's had some problems, for awards for fiction. We're going to hear from old Neil a bit more later. For her novels alone, she won 5 Locus Awards, 4 Nebula Awards, 2 Hugo Awards, and 1 World Fantasy Award, and won each of those awards in short fiction categories as well. Her third Earthsea novel, The Farthest Shore, won the 1973 National Book Award for Young People's Literature. That's what she won. So she won
Uh,
a YA award. Um,
mhm.
and she was a finalist for 10 Mythopoeic Awards, 9 in fantasy, and 1 for scholarship. Her 1996 collection, Unlocking the Air and Other Stories, was one of 3 finalists for the 1997 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction. That's a big one. Other awards won by Le Guin include 3 James Tiptree Jr. Awards and 3 Jupiter Awards. She won her final Hugo Award a year after her death for a complete edition of Earthsea, illustrated by Charles Vest. The same volume also won a Locus Award. On and on and on. There are more paras. You get the idea. Heavily awarded. Um, you know, and it's nice too that she seemed to have lived like a pretty nice life.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
all
Oh,
right.
she was making a bit of money. I mean, she was probably
Oh yeah.
I'm sure she was making some money on this too. Or some books were
Oh yeah. I
selling.
mean, and these were selling, and the rights were selling too. She was probably
Yeah.
getting, yeah. Le Guin did not want for anything.
Yeah.
Very, you would, I think it's fair to say, a charmed life.
Yeah.
Oh, this is a complete aside, and I hope you'll indulge me. In the background, we've been getting we got some texts from friends of the pod, friend of the pod, uh,
Hmm.
Michael Backinson.
Oh, hey,
You remember
cool.
good old
Oh yeah, of
Michael
course.
Backinson, actor friend. He was on the pod more than once in the early days of the pod. And you know how I said earlier during this episode that we appreciate corrections. This is more of an augmentation. And
Yeah.
this is a total aside, but I'm going to do it. Michael is an actor. And do you
Yeah.
recall on the Shakespeare and De Vere episodes, we had this discussion, and I'm dealing with this right now in my production of my play. How the hell do these actors memorize these lines?
Yeah.
Here's what Michael has to say. Listening to and enjoying the Shakespeare, I notice you both keep marveling over the ability to memorize text. One
Yeah.
thing to note is the English educational system then was essentially nothing but rote memorization. You were given long texts from a very young age, first in English and later Latin and possibly Greek, and you just memorized it. That was the class and the test, not analysis or comprehension so much as copious memorization. These actors would have had that as a life skill from a very young age and far fewer distractions. So that sort of rote learning was highly developed by the time they were acting professionally. It's a muscle. Oh, and you got hit with a switch if you messed up your recitation in school.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
thank you, Backinson.
Done.
We'll have to have you on at some point. You should come on, Michael, if you're listening, come on to a dark room to talk about Shakespeare and De Vere and
Yeah,
acting Shakespeare. We'd love to have you on. And this is an open invitation to anybody who has something to promote. If you're an artist yourself, you're a scholar, you're a writer. If you're a serious person interested in one of the core subjects we've covered, we do dark rooms. We are happy to hear from people. We can't have every single last person on who wants to be on, but if you really have a good case to come on, I'm very interested in the filmmaking of Stanley Kubrick, and I've written a book or I've written an essay about it. Reach out to us, artofdarkpod at gmail.com. All right.
indeed.
Coming into the home stretch here.
All right.
Um, this section is called Later Work and Environmental Themes. Le Guin's
Ah,
literary output in the 80s and 90s was marked by experimentation and a deepening engagement with environmental and social themes. In 1985, she published Always Coming Home, an experimental novel that blends science fiction and anthropology and poetry. Is that the one that I think said that it got the Pulitzer? Might have been.
not sure.
No, that was Unlocking the Air and Other Stories. But in any case, we're getting toward that time. 85, and then a decade later, she'd get the Pulitzer nom. In any case, or the finalist. Set in a future post-apocalyptic California, the novel is presented as an ethnographic study of the Kesh people, a peaceful agrarian society that lives in harmony with the natural world. So I've got a little bit about this from the last interview again. This is a great little book that I'm drawing on a lot. Um, and they're talking about her honors, and this is the interviewer. You've received a lot of honors and awards over the years, and the pace has picked up recently, but there's a sense among your admirers that you still haven't gotten your due, that your influence and accomplishments are only beginning to be charted. Le Guin, I've had a big influence, yeah, but I published as a genre writer when genre was not literature. So what can you say? I didn't play by the literary rules at the time. I wrote what was not literature. I wrote genre. I paid the price. Don DeLillo, who comes off as literary without question, takes the award over me because I published in genre and he didn't. Also, he's a man and I'm a woman. um,
Let's go to the bank accounts.
okay, right. Yeah, right.
I
Yeah,
mean,
she's mhm.
she sold she sold way more books than Don DeLillo, guaranteed.
Right.
Probably by a order of magnitude.
You're probably still selling more books than Don
Mm.
DeLillo. Yeah.
So
Listen,
so
I
not to
think it's a
say she
little,
doesn't have a yeah,
yeah,
not to
I think
say
it's
she
a
doesn't have a
little,
point. Just
sure.
yeah.
I'm just going to go on a limb and say that like Don DeLillo didn't win the National Book Award because of his dick and balls for White Noise.
Right.
I'm just going to say that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
It's a little sour grapes. Like I don't think it's Don DeLillo's fault. But this is a
Right.
parenthetical from the writer. This happened 30 years earlier, but clearly the wound was still fresh. In 1985, Le Guin published Always Coming Home, a story about people in California's Napa Valley who, she liked to say, might be going to have lived a long, long, long time from now. It was her longest work of fiction and her most unconventional, using stories, original folk tales, poetry, a glossary, dramatic works, illustrations, maps, and mock histories to depict a society that might be a utopia. The book, released in a box with a cassette tape of
Hmm.
music and songs that were an integral part of the story, did not sell well.
Hmm.
It was too mainstream for science fiction, too much like science fiction for the mainstream, but it did become one of the three finalists for the National Book Award for fiction. DeLillo went home with the prize for White Noise, a tale of an airborne toxic event that borrowed certain motifs from science fiction. In early 2019, the Library of America plans to publish Always Coming Home as the fourth volume in its authoritative series of Le Guin's work, a vindication of her original hopes for the tale. The interviewer: you are a pioneer. Le Guin, remember always you're talking to a woman. And for a woman, any literary award, honors, notice is an uphill job. And if she insists upon flouting convention and writing sci-fi and fantasy and indescribable stuff, well, you know how it's going to end up. Is the situation any better now, Le Guin? I have fits of, well, it isn't envy because I don't want celebrity, not at all. And it isn't exactly jealousy, but sometimes my nose is out of joint when I see some kind of crappy writer getting all sorts of literary honors, and I know I write better than he or she does. But all writers feel that way.
Hmm.
Interviewer: in my experience, writers always want the opposite of what they have. If you sell 10 million copies, you want to win the Nobel Prize. Win the Nobel Prize, and you want to sell 10 million copies.
Hmm.
And Le Guin says that's human nature.
Yeah.
Interviewer: still, you have been much honored of late. Uh, there is the 2014 National Book Foundation Medal for Distinguished Contribution to American Letters, and the Library of America is publishing your books. Le Guin, listen to this. Give me half this confidence. I don't think the honors have been overdone. I think I earned them. They are
Well,
welcome and useful to me because they shore up my self-esteem, which seems to wobble as you get old. And particularly with the National Book Foundation speech, it was really nice to know that people listened. You
yeah.
presented a bleak vision in that speech, but said that artists could help us out of it. Hard times are coming when we'll be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now. It went viral. Here's Le Guin. I definitely didn't foresee Donald Trump. I was
Hmm.
th- I was talking about longer term hard times than that. For 30 years, I've been saying we are making the world uninhabitable, for God's sake. For 40 years, that, as of old, was the writer's job, maybe his primary job, to show us the futures we didn't want and the futures we could have if we wanted. The key line in that speech for me, we're going to come to this speech, was the one about we live in capitalism, its power seems inescapable, but then so did the divine right of kings. We can change our
Hmm.
lives. All
Hmm.
right. Okay.
Okay.
So, yeah. What do we have here? I actually have something from Always Coming Home. It's one of the PDFs that I shared
Yeah, I've
with you.
got it up
Can you
here.
pull it up? Can you give a read?
Yeah, so there's a first note or the eight life stories, I
Why don't
guess,
you
is the
read? Why don't you read? No, read from a first note and then read
okay.
like, yeah, read a couple of those paid. Read up to the eight life stories.
Okay, got it. Quote, the people in this book might be going to have lived a long, long time from now in Northern California. She's doing something tricky with the tense there, if you're paying attention. The main part of the book is their voices speaking for themselves in stories and life stories, plays, poems, and songs. If the reader will bear with some unfamiliar terms, they will all be made clear at last. Coming at my work as a novelist, I thought it best to put many of the explanatory descriptive pieces into a section called the back of the book, where those who want narrative can ignore them and those who enjoy explanations can find them. The glossary may also be useful or amusing. The difficulty of translation from a language that doesn't yet exist is considerable, but there is no need to exaggerate it. The past, after all, can be quite as obscure as the future. The ancient Chinese book called the Tao Te Ching has been translated into English dozens of times, and indeed the Chinese have to keep retranslating it into Chinese at every cycle of Cathay. But no translation can give us the book that Lao Tzu, who may not have existed, wrote. All we have is the Tao Te Ching that is here now, and so with translations from a literature of the or a future. The fact that it hasn't yet been written, the mere absence of a text to translate, doesn't make all that much difference. What was and what may be lie, like children whose faces we cannot see, in the arms of silence. All we ever have is here, now. And then she offers a couple, I guess these are like poems from the language from these people, the Northern Californian people. So one of them is The Sun Going South, which is has a little note about it saying that it's an offering to the red adobe Hyamus of Shukolmas by Settled. The syllabic meter is nines, often used for elegy and meditations on mortality. And then she has a poem essentially. In late sunshine, I wander troubled. Restless, I walk in autumn sunlight. Too many changes, partings, and deaths. Doors have closed that were always open. Trees that held the sky up are cut down, so much that I alone remember. This creek runs dry among its stones. Souls of the dead, come drink this water. Come into this side valley with me, a restless old woman, unseemly, troubled, walking on dry grass, dry stones. And then read another one here called Before the Moon, which was given to the obsidian of Chumo by Catfish. Under the ground, under the moon, the wind is blowing, shadows are moving over the ground, shadows of eucalyptus. Leaves are blowing under the eucalyptus, wind moving shadows over the ground before the moon. So that's a little bit of Always Coming Home.
So a very experimental book
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
packaged with the cassette, just a
Interesting.
lot going on there.
Yeah.
And yeah. At the same time, though, White Noise is a masterpiece and a comic masterpiece. So
I know.
there you
So
are.
like
Mhm.
it's kind of hard
Yeah.
to, but
Eh.
I do understand this resentment of like you write stuff and you see other people do better and you're like, that's not as I get it. I totally get it. That's how it works.
Yeah. I mean, it sucks. I've been a finalist for some really big things, like in the
Mm,
playwriting. Nothing as big as the Pulitzer, but
sure.
stuff that would be career changing. where
Mm,
where you're like, and I known the people who get them, and sometimes, and they're fucking hacks. They're
yeah.
horrible, apparatchik hacks
Mm,
who write by they paint by color. They paint by
right.
paint by like
Number.
number, paint by
Yeah.
number.
Yeah.
Writing to win awards, right? And then they
Right.
have their
Right.
other factors in place. So yes, I
Right.
completely relate to this feeling. I'd be lying if
Yeah.
I said I didn't. But then
Yeah.
if I had won, they'd be sitting over there and going, "He's a fucking
Yeah.
hack. Fuck that."
Right.
So
Right.
but it's stupid. You got to kind of like you have to transcend all this stuff. You really do. And it's like
Yeah.
Ursula,
Yeah.
how many copies have you sold? Like, honey, like
Right.
you're
Yeah.
gonna be okay.
You knocked it
Yeah,
out of the park. Trust me.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. You're fine. Yeah, but
Mm,
I can get it. All right. So okay. She once described Always Coming Home as the closest I've come to writing a utopia, but it's a utopia that acknowledges the importance of suffering and imperfection. The novel's structure, comprising stories, poems, songs, and even recipes, challenged conventional narrative forms, reflecting Le Guin's ongoing commitment to pushing the boundaries of genre. During this period, Le Guin also returned to the Earthsea series with Tehanu, 1990, which revisited many of the characters and themes from the earlier novels, but through a more feminist lens. Tehanu won the Nebula Award for Best Novel, and its darker, more introspective tone marked a shift in her approach to the series. In the 90s, she published several collections of short stories that explored a wide range of topics from the ethics of cloning to the nature of power and freedom. These later works continued to demonstrate Le Guin's ability to weave together complex social, political, and philosophical ideas within the framework of speculative fiction. I've got a little bit about her appreciation of Taoism, and this is from something called Eco Stories, ekostories.com. Isaac Yuen, The Feminine and the Tao, an interview with Ursula K. Le Guin. Um, so, as the interviewer, Lao Tzu's insistence on the inner authority of this discerning eye is an antidote to those of us drowning in an age of information. His philosophy is also a balance to the media obsession today with the cult of personality, self-consciousness, and ego. Can you talk about this, Ursula? Lao Tzu says things like, don't be controlled by love. He says that people who don't cherish their own bodies can't look after other people effectively. It's a bit shocking. Lao Tzu is anti-altruist. That's pretty clear. Altruism and egoism are just two sides of one coin to Lao Tzu. Either you look after yourself or you turn away from yourself and look after others. Lao Tzu says, no, 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 that's not where it's at. That's the wrong choice. You have to do both. And this is on Taoist advertisements. Interviewer, can you imagine a Taoist advertising agency? Buy this if you feel like it. If it's right,
Right.
you may not need it.
Yeah.
Ursula. There was an old cartoon in the New Yorker with a guy from an advertising agency showing his ad, and the boss is saying, I think you need a little more enthusiasm, Jones. And his ad is saying, try our product. It really isn't that bad. And here's the interviewer. As a product of 2,000 years, the Tao has certainly proven itself an enduring spiritual text, Ursula. It is impressive and touching, isn't it? That this weird little book has just gone on so sturdily. All through Chinese history, it was written during a really bad period in Chinese history, the Warring States period. Society then was much less reliable even than our own. And in the middle of it, here comes this book that seems not very comforting, that seems to put everything at risk, and yet it does give comfort in a bad time, even now. I had a long period where I would go back to the Tao Te Ching. I have no
Mm.
problem reconciling Catholicism with some of the meditative philosophical ideas in the Tao Te Ching. I think that there's room for both. I mean, Buddhism is essentially at its heart, it's a psychological. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, so
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, I don't. I lean more toward the one true faith naturally.
Sure.
But
But I mean,
I think there's a yeah.
there's not a lot in the Tao Te Ching that's really like cosmological anyway, right? I mean, in
Hmm.
terms of, I haven't actually spent that much time with it, so I probably shouldn't talk about it. But
Yeah, it's worth having a copy, I would say. And she has a
um,
translation, and I've got it right in front of me, and it's
cool,
the PDF, and it's Lao Tzu Tao Te Ching, a book about the way and the power of the way, a New English version by Ursula K. Le Guin.
cool.
So let's see here, and this is from Shambhala, of course, and then it's introduction, and this is her introduction to her Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching was probably written about 2,500 years ago, perhaps by a man called Lao Tzu, who may have lived at about the same time as Confucius. Nothing about it is certain except that it's Chinese and very old and speaks to people everywhere as if it had been written yesterday. The first Tao Te Ching I ever saw was the Paul Karras edition of 1898, bound in yellow cloth, stamped with blue and red Chinese designs and characters. It was a venerable object of mystery, which I soon investigated and found more fascinating inside than out. The book was my father's. He read in it often. Once I saw him making notes from it and asked what he was doing. He said he was marking which chapters he'd like to have read at his funeral. We did read those chapters at his memorial service. I have the book, now 98 years old and further ornamented with red binding tape to hold the back on, and have marked which chapters I'd like to have read at my funeral. In the notes, I explain why I was so lucky to discover Lao Tzu in that particular edition. Here, I will only say that I was lucky to discover him so young so that I could live with his book my whole life long. I also discuss other aspects of my version in the notes, the how of it. Here, I want to state very briefly the why of it. The Tao Te Ching is partly in prose, partly in verse, but as we define poetry now, not by rhyme and meter, but as a patterned intensity of language, the whole thing is poetry. I wanted to catch that poetry, its terse, strange beauty. Most translations have caught meanings in their net, but prosily letting the beauty slip through. And in poetry, beauty is no ornament, it is the meaning. It is the truth. We have that on good authority. Scholarly translations of the Tao Te Ching as a manual for rulers use a vocabulary that emphasizes the uniqueness of the Taoist sage, his masculinity, his authority. This language is perpetuated and degraded in most popular versions. I wanted a book of the way accessible to a present day, unwise, unpowerful, perhaps unmale reader, not seeking esoteric secrets, but listening for a voice that speaks to the soul. I would like that reader to see why people have loved the book for 2,500 years. It is the most lovable of all the great religious texts, funny, keen, kind, modest, indestructibly outrageous, and inexhaustibly refreshing. Of all the deep springs, this is the purest water. To me, it is also the deepest spring. And then here's just I'll read one. This is called Dowing. The way you can go isn't the real way. The name you can say isn't the real name. Heaven and earth begin in the unnamed. Name's the mother of the 10,000 things. So the unwanting soul sees what's hidden, and the ever wanting soul sees only what it wants. Two things, one origin, but different in name, whose identity is mystery. Mystery of all mysteries, the door to the hidden. I'll read one. And then her note is, a satisfactory translation of this chapter is, I believe, perfectly impossible. It contains the book. I think of it as the Aleph in Borges's story, Friend
Mm,
of the Pod. If you
yeah.
see it rightly, it contains everything. I'll read
Wow.
two as well. I love this book. Um, she calls this soul food. Everybody on earth knowing that beauty is beautiful makes ugliness. Everybody knowing that goodness is good makes wickedness. For being and non-being arise together. Hard and easy complete each other. Long and short shape each other. High and low depend on each other. Note and voice make the music together. Before and after follow each other. That's why the wise soul does without doing, teaches without talking. The things of this world exist. They are. You can't refuse them. To bear and not to own, to act and not lay claim, to do the work and let it go. For just letting it go is what makes it stay.
All right. I
Yep.
like it.
Yep. Yep. There's a lot of wisdom there. All right. Home
Indeed.
stretch here now, Brett. Yep. Yep. Get a copy of the Tao Te Ching. Go online and read if you're a young person, especially. I think it's worth whatever your religious tradition. It's an outstanding book of philosophy that will teach you to not hang on so tightly to everything.
Mm. Yeah, we could all use that.
Yeah, yeah, and
Yeah.
keep a copy lying around for sure. The way you might
Yeah.
keep a copy of the Bible around.
Mm.
Um, they have different purposes for sure. One is the absolute literal truth of God, and the other is the Bible. Just kidding. No, of course the
Dang.
Bible is
Whoa.
the absolute
Whoa.
literal.
Whoa.
No. Right, we have to do an entire episode on the nature of that would be a very cool episode to do to be a like a maybe behind the paywall episode on the Bible. I'm
Mm.
increasingly very interested in this idea of biblical time and like prophetic time, the way
Mm.
that
Mhm.
the whole Bible is hyperlinked to itself. The
Oh
the
yeah, it's
beginning,
fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, I think that's just a fascinating subject.
Yeah.
Um, so in any case, um, so let's see here. Beyond her fiction, Le Guin was a passionate advocate for writers' rights and an outspoken critic of corporate influence in publishing. In December 2009, Le Guin resigned from the Authors Guild in protest over its endorsement of Google's book digitization project. You decided to deal with the devil, she wrote in her resignation letter. So she resigns from the Authors Guild because
Wow.
they endorse Google's digitization. There are principles involved. Above all, the whole concept of copyright. And these you have seen fit to abandon to a corporation on their terms without a struggle. In a speech to the 2014 National Book Awards, Le Guin criticized Amazon and the control it exerted over the publishing industry, specifically referencing Amazon's treatment of the Hachette Book Group during a dispute over ebook publication. Her speech received widespread media attention in the US and outside the US and was broadcast twice by NPR. And here's her speech from 2014, which we alluded to earlier. Um, to the givers of this beautiful reward, my thanks from the heart. My family, my agents, my editors know that my being here is their doing as well as my own, and that the beautiful reward is theirs as much as mine. And I rejoice in accepting it for and sharing it with all the writers who've been excluded from literature for so long, my fellow authors of fantasy and science fiction, writers of the imagination, who for 50 years have watched the beautiful rewards go to the so-called realists. Hard times are coming when we'll be wanting the voices of writers who can see alternatives to how we live now, can see through our fear-stricken society and its obsessive technologies to other ways of being and even imagine real grounds for hope. We'll need writers who can remember freedom, poets, visionaries, realists of a larger reality. Right now, we need writers who know the difference between production of a market commodity and the practice of an art. Developing written material to suit sales strategies in order to maximize corporate profit and advertising revenue is not the same thing as responsible book publishing or authorship. Yet I see sales departments given control over editorial. I see my own publishers in a silly panic of ignorance and greed, charging public libraries for an ebook 6 or 7 times more than they charge customers. We just saw a profiteer, Amazon, try to punish a publisher for disobedience and writers threatened by corporate fatwa. And I see a lot of us, the producers who write the books and make the books, accepting this, letting commodity profiteers sell us like deodorant and tell us what to publish, what to write. Books aren't just commodities. The profit motive is often in conflict with the aims of art. We live in capitalism. Its power seems inescapable, but then so did the divine right of kings. Any human power can be resisted and changed by human beings. Resistance and change often begin in art. Very often in our art, the art of words. I've had a
Mm.
long career as a writer and a good one in good company. Here, at the end of it, I don't want to watch American literature get sold down the river. We who live by writing and publishing want and should demand our fair share of the proceeds, but the name of our beautiful reward isn't profit. Its name is freedom.
Mm.
Hell of a
Yeah.
speech. Yeah.
Yeah. Man,
Yeah.
80 some year old woman just coming out and just like, I'm gonna tell you what this is. Like, I love it. I love it, man. And it does reflect like a somewhat an attitude that you don't really hear that much anymore. I mean, we're all kind of everybody's sort of most of us have sort of resigned to the bought and sold nature of all this and kind of just, if you even notice it, we just kind of sigh. And she's coming from that older, when people used to have artistic integrity. She's coming from that. She's coming from that school. And I love to hear it.
Yeah, and I have absolutely nothing against authors getting paid their fair share.
No,
I
me
mean,
neither. No, no, of course not.
I
She doesn't
mean,
either.
the publishing industry is one of the most rotten industries in the world.
Yeah,
I don't think
yeah.
that's news to anybody. Uh,
Right.
Everybody except Broadway Play Publishing, which is deigned to publish a couple, and with whom I would like to have a long relationship. But I
Yeah.
mean, I think we can
And
all
me
agree,
and
like,
whoever
yeah.
publishes my next book.
And
Yeah,
yeah,
them too.
whoever publish, yeah, whoever publishes Brad Kelly there. But I mean, really, I mean, is publishing working? I mean, is it really
Right.
working? Is it getting the best,
No,
the highest quality literature into the most hands? Is it
no,
selling fiction to men
no.
who probably need more fiction?
Yeah,
You know, and I
no.
love her whole thing because we on Art of Darkness, we don't realism doesn't exist in the Art of
Right,
Darkness world.
right,
There's
right,
and everything is fiction. I think history is fiction. Most
right.
written history is fiction. It's all fiction. It's
Hmm.
all fantasy. So
Hmm.
yeah.
Indeed.
We are on the same page as old Ursula.
Yeah, I love
Uh,
her.
Ursula. That's a name you don't hear much anymore.
No.
Yeah. So I mean, I've got an article here. It's not pulling up, but it was like from Portland Monthly Mag, and like, oh, here it is. It's from the archive, so it loads slowly, but it's like the title of it is Ursula K. Le Guin rocks the National Book Awards. like that speech was like incendiary. Like
Yeah,
you're supposed to get up there and say your piece and
right. And thank you, and thank you, and
thank
thank
you
you.
and thank you.
Yeah,
And she took a moment to call out like Google and or to call out Amazon. Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Let me see here. Uh the speech started out as a smattering of applause, but by the end she got a standing ovation. Said Theo
Nice.
Down Le Guin, Le Guin's son, who also runs Contemporary Art Gallery up for in Portland. We caught up with him this morning by phone as he assisted his mother through New York airport security on their way home. I was incredibly proud of her. She made me cry. But those moved by Le Guin's speech went far beyond attendees at the Black Tie Manhattan event. Overnight, Le Guin blew up web editions of the LA Times, Guardian, New Yorker, Wall Street Journal, and more. NPR ran Le Guin's anti-capitalist critique as breaking news last night and again for morning commuters. The hashtag NBA Awards is almost entirely devoted to frothy Le Guin tweets, including one from fantasy titan Neil Gaiman, who introduced Le Guin prior to awarding her medal. Um, well, in any case, I already read it, but
Mhm.
and then it breaks it down. And who wasn't happy about Le Guin's speech? The contingent from Amazon, who according to
Yeah,
NPR's Petra Meyer, notably had no comment on Le Guin's speech or the ribbing they endured throughout the night. Down Le
right.
Guin says his mom challenged the status quo in a room not only full of writers but also book publishers. All right,
Yeah,
so getting up there and going,
yeah.
she's got something to say.
Yeah, Bezos just like had probably had her website deleted or something afterwards.
She's
They don't
gonna
have to say anything.
She's going to be one of the first ones to be assigned a permanent basilisk in
Yeah.
the future
Yeah.
dystopia. No, so, all right.
Yeah.
So we're pretty much done here, Brad. Her speeches that we will come back. We will have more on the After Dark. Let me wrap it up. Her speeches and
Mhm.
essays collected in volumes like Dancing at the Edge of the World and No Time to Spare, which I have a copy of right here, and maybe I want to read a little bit of that. Reveal a writer deeply engaged with the moral and ethical questions of her time. And this is true. And I'm going to read, this is from November 2010. So this is a little out of order before she gave that speech. But this is just, I think it's a blog entry, and it's called The Sissy Strikes Back. I've lost faith in the saying, you're only as old as you think you are, ever since I got old. It is a saying with a fine heritage. It goes right back to the idea of the power of positive thinking, which is so strong in America because it fits so well with the power of commercial advertising and with the power of wishful thinking, aka the American dream. It is the bright side of Puritanism. What you deserve is what you get. Never mind just now about the dark side. Good things come to good people, and youth will last forever for the young in heart. Yup. There is a whole lot of power in positive thinking. It is the great placebo effect. In many cases, even dire cases, it works. I think most old people know that, and many of us try to keep our thinking on the positive side as a matter of self preservation as well as dignity, the wish not to end with prolonged whimper. It can be very hard to believe that one is actually 80 years old. But as they say, you'd better believe it. I've known clear headed, clear hearted people in their 90s. They didn't think they were young. They knew with a patient, canny clarity how old they were. If I'm 90 and believe I'm 45, I'm headed for a very bad time trying to get out of the bathtub. Even if I'm 70 and think I'm 40, I'm fooling myself to the extent of almost certainly acting like an awful fool. Actually, I've never heard anybody over 70 say that you're only as old as you think you are. Younger people say it to themselves or each other as an encouragement. When they say it to somebody who actually is old, they don't realize how stupid it is and how cruel it may be. At least there isn't a poster of it. But there is a poster of old age is not for sissies. Maybe it's where the saying came from, a man and a woman in their 70s. As I remember it, they both have what the Air Force used to call the look of eagles and are wearing very tight fitting, minimal clothing and are altogether very fit. Their pose suggests that they've just run a marathon and aren't breathing very hard while they relax by lifting 16-pound barbells. Look at us, they say. Old age is not for sissies. Look at me, I snarl at them. I can't run. I can't lift barbells. And the thought of me in tight fitting minimal clothing is appalling in all ways. I am a sissy. I always was. Who are you jocks to say old age isn't for me? Old age is for anybody who gets there. Warriors get old. Sissies get old. In fact, it's likely that more sissies than warriors get old. Old age is for the healthy, the strong, the tough, the intrepid, the sick, the weak, the cowardly, the incompetent, people who run 10 miles every morning before breakfast, and people who live in a wheelchair. People who work the London Times crossword in ink in 10 minutes, and people who can't quite remember who the president is just now. Who is the president right now, Brad?
I'm not
Old
sure.
age is less a matter of fitness or courage than of luck equals longevity. If you eat your sardines and leafy greens and wear SPF 150 and develop your abs and blabs and slabs or whatever they are in order to live a long life, that's good and maybe it will work. But the longer a life is, the more of it will be old age. The leafy greens and the workouts may well help that old age to be healthy, but unfair as it may be, nothing guarantees health to the old. Bodies wear out after a certain amount of mileage despite the most careful maintenance. No matter what you eat and how grand your abs and blabs are, still your bones can let you down. Your heart can get tired of its incredible nonstop, lifelong athletic performance. And there's all that wiring and stuff inside that can begin to short circuit. If you did hard physical labor all your life and didn't really have the chance to spend a lot of time in gyms, if you ate mostly junk food because it's all you know about and all you could afford in time and money, if you haven't got a doctor because you can't buy the insurance that stands between you and the doctors and the medicines you need, you may arrive at old age in rather bad shape. Or if you just run into some bad luck along the way, accidents, illnesses, it's the same. You won't be running marathons and lifting weights. You may have trouble getting up the stairs. You may have trouble getting out of bed. You may have trouble getting used to hurting all the time. And it isn't just likely to get better as the years go on. The compensation of getting old, such as they are, aren't in the field of athletic prowess. I think that's why the saying and the poster annoy me so much. They're not only insulting to sissies, they're beside the point. I'd like a poster showing two old people with stooped backs and arthritic hands and time-worn faces sitting, talking, deep in conversation. And the slogan would be, old age is not for the young. So that's a little taste of Le Guin and her
Yeah,
wit.
I like
Just a
it.
great
Yeah,
writer,
witty,
just so
acerbic.
clear.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just right. I'm old. I'm a sissy. You're not gonna get me to lift any weights.
Right.
Um,
I
in
like
her
it.
final years, she turned away from writing fiction and focused instead on poetry, essays, and translations. Her collection, So Far So Good, Final Poems, 2014 to 2018, would be published posthumously. And I'm going to read three of these poems. These are the three poems that they have at the Poetry Foundation. Brad, I'm going to give you one of them to read to
Oh,
break this
okay.
up and give you a little chance. Can you read this poem, Six Quatrains, when you get a chance? I'll read
Yep.
this poem,
Yep.
Leaves, then you'll read six quatrains, and then
Got
I'll
it.
read one more. So, Leaves. Years do odd things to identity. What does it mean to say I am a child in the photograph at Kishimish in 1935? Might as well say I am the shadow of a leaf of the acacia tree felled 70 years ago. Moving on the page, the child reads. Might as well say I am the words she read or the words I wrote in other years. Flicker of shade and sunlight as the wind moves through the leaves. And
Lovely.
you read six quatrains.
Yeah, there's six quatrains. The first is autumn. Gold of amber, red of ember, brown of umber, all September. Second one is called McCoy Creek. Over the bright shallows, now no flights of swallows, leaves of the sheltering willow dangle thin and yellow. It's one October. It's appropriate. October's coming up. At 4 in the morning, the west wind moved in the leaves of the beech tree with a long rush and patter of water, first wave of the dark tide coming in. Here's one called Solstice. On the longest night of all the year in the forests up the hill, the little owl spoke soft and clear to bid the night be longer still. Here's the winds of May. The winds of May are soft and restless in their leafy garments that rustle and sway, making every moment movement. Here's one called Hail. The dogwood covered under the thunder. Oh, sorry. Let me start over. The dogwood cowered under the thunder, and the lilacs burned like light itself against the storm black sky until the hail whitened the grass with petals. Yeah, very nice. Very leaning almost towards like a basho Japanese haiku. They're not haikus, but that thematically kind of the same space. Yeah,
Yeah, I can
cool.
really see the appeal of toward the end of your days of sitting down to write these tidy little
Hmm.
meditations and to just flex your wisdom. You're not going to be any
Right.
wiser.
Right.
It's
Right.
the
Yeah.
candle is gonna go out
Indeed.
in this on
Indeed.
this plane. Um, I'll read one more final poem. This is called To the Rain. I'm just pulling it up here. Mother rain, manifold, measureless, falling on fallow, on field and forest, on house roof, low hovel, high tower, down welling waters, all washing wider than cities, softer than sisterhood, vaster than countrysides, calming, recalling, return to us, teaching our troubled souls in your ceaseless descent to fall, to be fellow, to feel, to the root, to sink in, to heal, to sweeten the sea.
I like that.
To the rain.
Yeah.
She's writing a poem to the
The
rain. The
rain.
rain.
I like that. Very cool. Very
Uh,
cool. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Aren't those sweet? I mean, and that's the form,
Yeah.
that she started with, I believe. I mean, I think
Yeah.
uh, a lot of authors start with poetry.
Indeed. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I think having a fidelity with poetry is good for style, as she talked about early on. Helps you
absolutely. I
understand
mean,
that rhythm she's talking about.
yeah, yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. I'm just seeing if I can find an exact cause of death. I have the impression that it's one of those. Yeah, here. You just probably a heart attack. All right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. She passed away on January 22nd, 2018, at the
Okay,
age of
6 years ago.
88.
Yeah.
Her death was met with an outpouring of tributes from writers, critics, and readers around the world. Neil Gaiman said Ursula K. Le Guin changed the way we look at science fiction, fantasy, and literature itself. She was a giant, and we are lucky to have had her for so long. Margaret Atwood wrote in her tribute, she showed us that there are many ways to imagine a world, and that imagination itself is a form of resistance.
Hmm.
And here's just a little bit from Conversations on Writing to wrap it up. Children know perfectly well that unicorns aren't real, says Ursula K. Le Guin, but they also know that books about unicorns, if they are good books, are true books.
Yeah,
And
I like that.
and this episode is called Ursula K. Le Guin, The Journey is Return. That was another core
I
episode from
like
Art
it.
of
Yeah.
Darkness. I will
Thanks,
see.
Kevin. That was great.
You're welcome. Yeah. Did you have a good time, Brad?
I did, man. Yeah, I'm so
Okay.
glad to know about her. And different episodes strike me different. This one, like some we've done in the past, but very strongly, it's like, oh man, I want to get writing. I gotta like, I've been in editing mode lately, which is like very fine cutting. I'm not doing a lot of creative work lately in these last few weeks, and so there's part of me that's like, yeah, I want to make something after this episode. Yeah, so this is
Yeah, I
exciting.
mean, and I'm in rehearsals for moderation. If you're in Minnesota,
Yeah.
moderationplay.com, in October here. And yeah, I'm feeling the same way. It's like, okay, I have this script, it's done, we're not changing it. And now it's like,
Mhm.
oh my God, and I'm hanging out with these actors, and all I can think is, oh God, I want to write them something new. And it's like, no, we got to focus on this thing. But yeah, I've been going, and it's very similar
Right.
feeling, engaging with her stuff. It's just like, wow, she's just so
Yeah.
vital. And it's so cool that we have all our stuff and we get to talk more about Le Guin for book club for patrons, patreon.com/art of dark pod,
Cool.
substack.com/art of dark pod. October 19th, we will be meeting for 90 minutes ish, 75, 90 minutes on Zoom. Book Club, Left-Handed Darkness. Join us for that if you like this episode. If you didn't like this episode, join us for that, and
Yeah.
or just listen back on the paywall streams. Let's
Mhm.
close it out, Brad. If
Yeah.
if Ursula K. Le Guin, she died just a few years ago, but we always ask at the end of a core episode, what do you think she'd be doing today? What is Ursula K. Le
Yeah.
Guin getting up to?
Yeah, man. I like to imagine her just sort of continuously expanding the Earthsea and Hainish worlds, right? Just continuously building these. I mean, she created these amazing vessels for her to continue telling narratives. She doesn't need to make any new worlds. I feel like she can just explore these. And maybe, as she gets older, it's even the poetry starts to take place in those worlds, right? Even like all of it starts
Mm,
to happen in
mm.
those spaces, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think it depends on. And this question is always a little goofy because it's like,
Yeah.
do we have a young Ursula K. Le Guin or does she live to be 100? Right.
Yeah.
But let's imagine we have an Ursula K. Le Guin at the height of her powers. Yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying. I feel like
Yeah.
she would be aghast at the political environment. I think she would have said, "I
Yeah.
told you so,"
Mhm.
and horrified at the state of things. But also, having lived from 1929 till now, maybe not surprised
Yeah. Yeah.
either. So, but
And I
I,
think I think there's an alternate reality right next to ours in which she did win the Nobel Prize. Because I will tell you, I've read the works of a lot of Nobel Prize winners, and hers fits right in there. It's as good
yeah,
as any of it. So
absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, we're gonna come back on the After Dark for patrons. We're gonna talk a little bit more about her mother and that relationship. We are going to talk about Ishi and that
Okay.
story.
Yeah.
We're going to read the New York Times obituary, and for the artists among us, we are going to read an article about how to become a writer
Oh, good.
per one of the most prolific and impactful and influential and important American writers of the 20th century, Ursula K. Le Guin. Cool.
Cool.
All right,
Looking
Brad,
forward
I'm going
to
to
it.
go. I'm when I return, I will be fully in heat.
Okay, all right. Kemmer begins in just a few minutes.